Have you ever imagined a world, well, fill in the blank? Spark Hub is about making dreams happen when life throws major curveballs at you. It's my hope that any time you listen to an episode, something will spark inside of you, and even if no one listens, but I leave some kind of legacy time capsule behind for my children that may even spark them to imagine their own great world after I'm gone, well, that's good enough for me. Below each episode are crucial show notes, and please support us by visiting thesparkhub.com. Now, let's begin. My name is Alan, and I have a heck of a story for you. In this episode, please buckle yourself in because it's a bit of a wild ride, especially for me. It's a very personal journey, and it probably ends with the conclusion that the acorn doesn't fall far from the tree. I took advantage of a US business trip to Dogleg back through Montreal, Canada, where I was mostly raised. Now I say mostly because, as you'll hear, there were some episodes, especially in my early life, where I wasn't in Canada. I wanted to record my dad's life story for rather selfish reasons, as well as keeping an archive for my children so they could know their grandfather, who sadly they didn't get to spend a lot of time with because there was the Atlantic Ocean between us, as well as COVID, cost of living, and a whole other bunch of reasons why we didn't get to see him much. But here's his legacy recorded for posterity, and it winds wildly between why he left the UK for Canada, why him and my mother jumped in a caravan and took a nearly 2-year odyssey around all the Americas, why we moved to South Korea, then did a world tour, and when I was very young, before resettling in the suburbs of Montreal, from where I would launch several of my own adventures to other places far-flung in the world, and eventually start areyoumywife.com. So without further ado, please enjoy the life stories of my dad, Derek Wills. So, test 1, 2, 3, testing, and if you say something.
Yes, well, it's a delight to have you home, Alan.
Okay, good. Looks like the recording's working. Yeah, I wanted to sort of reminisce a little bit, and one of the first stories I wanted to get your memory on was ham radio. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yes, but I've never been involved with that.
Well, when you did, you told me the stories of you were fiddling with radios and finding frequencies and dialing and speaking to people in Russia and stuff.
Well, in the old days, the radio is what they call a crystal set.
That's it. It was crystal set, not ham radio. Sorry.
And then you had to. There was a little tiny wire which you had to try and find a spot on this crystal, and if you got it right, you could actually pick up transmissions. And then you had there was a coil within a coil, and you turn the knob, and you could sort of explore the different frequencies.
You could listen in on.
You could listen in, yeah. But it was a reception device. It wasn't two-way in any means. And to get a good pickup, I used to put a big long wire from my bedroom window, I think it was, along my mum's washing line. So I had the longer you can get the wire, and you can pick up sort of long waves, as they were called then, because they were long waves. They travelled over vast distances, so you could tune into quite remote.
How far away do you remember getting in different languages? Even would you have picked up different languages?
Well, you go. Yes, you wind through the spectrum, so to speak.
What age were you when you were doing that? Do you remember? It must have been young years, eh?
Yes, probably 8 or 9 or 10 or something like that. I can't remember specifically. Because in my early days, we were living in a place called West Wickham.
Okay.
One of the far suburbs of southern London. And World War II was sort of recently over, so to speak. And we lived in a house with another family. It was not uncommon then for different members of the family to get together. So in this house, we were cohabitating with my stepfather's brother and wife.
Wow.
And even in those days, to have a telephone was unthinkable. So if you wanted to phone up, you would go down the road, and there was a rich family who we were friendly with, and you could ask to use their phone, because the classic phone boxes, the public ones, were few and far between.
Wow.
So
is that why you wanted to do the radio thing? Was it just a little
experiment? No, it's just a kid thing to explore with this. Just if you could find the right little spot on the crystal, then you could go with a pair of headphones.
But then you must have been curious to do that. You must have had a curious nature to want to do that.
I don't remember buying it specifically. Maybe it was a hand-me-down from one of the other family members or something. And it was all in a beautiful veneered wooden box with a lid and the tuning dial and the little crystal and so on. Yeah, I'm sure if you Googled it, you could probably get a picture, an image of it.
So from then, jumping forward, I guess, were you 25 when you came to Canada?
Well, we moved down. My parents bought a place in a place called Hildenborough. When we were living together in West Wickham, my uncle Brian, brother to my stepfather, and his wife, Auntie Angela, they found that there was a new building estate, and they decided to buy a new house, sort of break away and be onto their own. And then my mum and dad said, hey, we should move down there as well, so we'd be close to each other. And there was a grandma to look after, and she was sort of shuttled around, but she ended up with us when we moved down to Hildenborough.
I swear I remember that, because there was a park with a tractor in it, and we used to go, Nanny B was up in a room. She was up on the top floor in her own room.
Oh.
And I went in, and there was a shed in the back that apparently you blew up at one point. And Nanny told me that's the shed that your dad blew up at one point or something.
Oh dear, I don't remember.
So I do remember as a kid going there.
Oh.
I'm pretty sure it was Hildenborough. And it was the house.
I would have been just a youth then.
Oh, okay.
You would have been far down the line, so to speak, because I went off to...
Because when did she move to the place that was sort of on a hill and it had an ambulance in it? Yeah, Granddad had his car on Spitfire on bricks.
Oh, yeah.
That was the next house I remember, but I remember visiting Grandma in a house that I thought was Hildenborough, and it was down the road from Daryl and Catherine.
That's right, you're right, yeah.
So I did see that place.
Yeah, but I never lived there. That was
after.
A later sort of thing. Yes.
So fast forwarding, how would you have made your way to...
Well, from Hildenborough, when I was living down there, I was working at one of these government research places, and I was what they called a scientific assistant working in one of the labs. I aspired to get better educated, so I got signed on to what in those days was called a CAT college, C-A-T, College of Advanced Technology, which was located in Islington. So I went there studying applied physics for 4 years, and when I first went to London, because I had to live there, I couldn't commute all the way down from Hildenborough. I think first I was in a dormitory at some YMCA place, and then later I latched on to some friends who worked at the BBC, and they had a lovely accommodations, and they said I'd be welcome to rent and join them.
And that was in Islington, right?
Yeah. And so on this CAT college, the idea, it was called a sandwich course. You did half the year was academic, you were at the college, and then the other half of the year they would find you a job in industry to give you some practical experience. So during that time I went to 4 different companies. One of them was to do with laser beams at that time, which were just coming into use. Then at one point I was up in the Midlands near Middlesbrough for one of my stints.
So you moved around.
I was another guy in my class also was designated to work for another company up there, so the pair of us managed to find a place. We put an ad in the newspaper saying 2 physicists seeking, accommodation, and a very nice couple responded, and we met with them. And we signed on with them, and they even prepared dinners for us and so on. So we were very well catered to. It's just one of those fortuitous things that happened, making you scratch back into history there.
Well, that's the whole point. This gets recorded.
Yeah. But as I say, it was a cat college that I went to, but in actual fact, we got university status, and we all came away with degrees, which was.
But you didn't anticipate that going in. You
no,
didn't?
no.
Oh, okay. That was lucky then.
Yeah, somebody had applied to upgrade this college to become. It's called City University, London.
Yeah.
So this made our graduation credentials, a piece of paper, look a bit more impressive. We'd come not from a cat college, but from a city university.
Wow.
Sort of thing. I'm not sure how it helped with my job applications, but...
Well, my experience of university was I've got the degree and no one looked at it.
Yeah, no,
I just had to talk my way into everything. And
commonplace. And then I never actually went to the presentation of the degrees, because by then I'd emigrated to Canada. I was lured over by a friend who was also in the same class as me, and he emigrated to Toronto, and he was writing these glorious letters saying, "Hey, Derek, you've got to emigrate. This is fantastic here. There's skiing, and you can get a job the next day after you get off the plane, and the Canadian government pays for your airfare to come over, and you got 2 years to pay them back." It was an era where Canada was just tripping over themselves to try and get young, educated people, and I fitted the bill.
So it was a brain drain, they call it, isn't it?
The brain drain, yeah. Even in the underground, when you were coming down, you were seeing these, come to Australia, emigrate to Canada, and so on. They don't do that now because they're just so overwhelmed with refugees and so on that program has long since fizzled away.
I remember this story you said you left with $50 in a suitcase, and now you've got $1 in 50 suitcases.
That's my classic story.
That's your line, isn't it? But I can't imagine what it must. So you landed in Toronto first, but we ended up in Montreal somehow.
Yeah, well, it was the year 1967, the so-called year of Expo, where the city of Montreal had put on a world fair. Mm. And most of the significant countries in the world had come, and they built pavilions to show off what they were famous for. And the classic one was the Russian pavilion was competing against the US pavilion.
They're trying to upstage each other, were they?
Yeah, trying to impress people. What would you call that era where the communists...
Cold War?
The Cold War, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So even in Montreal, on a global stage, they were trying to...
Yes, outshow each other. And, well, all to say, just one weekend, I left Toronto just to come and see what the city of Montreal was like, and it just blew my mind to go and see the expo. And they even had an elevated railroad which could drive you all through between
like a
the
monorail.
Pavilions. Yeah, the monorail.
Wow.
And then advanced for its time was a 360-degree theatre, and you could stand in the middle there and you could see all these Mounties on horses coming towards you 360,
wow.
Which was quite special for the time. And then I went downtown, and of course all the nightlife and so on. And of course Montreal is on an island, so it's not far. You've got the St. Lawrence River sort of swishing around, and all the expo was set up on. They actually built an island, St. Helens Island, to be able to stage all this.
Wait, it was on St. Helens Island?
I believe it was.
Because that's where I ended up working security. You remember I used to drive down there. I used to work security, but it wasn't certainly for the expo. But You know, you went to school in Islington and I lived in Islington. You were on St. Helens Island. I worked on St. Helens Island. So retracing your step.
Yeah,
but yeah, so it sounded like the glory days then.
I was so impressed. I thought, well, I'm going to leave Toronto and move to Montreal. I was still liaising with Yardis, and I said, hey, why don't you go to the Canadian Embassy?
Were you and Mum married at this point?
No.
Okay.
No. Yeah, that was in the subsequent year that we married. She wanted to come over and see what it was like.
So you're writing letters to Mom saying, I've just found this amazing city. Go to the Canadian Embassy and come for a visit.
Yeah. In essence, I guess, yeah.
Wow. But wait, just to revert, you and Mum met in university? Did you meet at the...
Yes, because like many students in London, they're all looking for how to get some entertainment on Friday nights when you've done all your studying and attended lectures. And we discovered something called the Anglo-Danish Society used to host a sort of a dance at some place, or a sort of a social.
Was it Swiss Cottage by any chance? Because there's something about Swiss Cottage Mum keeps talking about. Was that where the dance was, or...?
No, that's where Mum in her time, when she was studying in Elephant and Castle area, she had a setup where she looked after an old lady and got free accommodation. And that was in the Swiss Cottage area.
There's the connection.
Yeah.
So then you met Mum, you moved to Canada, you said to her, you should see this place.
Come on over.
And in those days, there was no emails, it was all... letters and phone calls.
High reliance on letters, and phoning wasn't quite in because that was, incredibly expensive.
Yeah.
Unless it was an emergency or something. So my first job here was at a company called the Montreal Locomotive Works.
Oh my goodness.
But interestingly, we were trying to solve a problem which was called wheel slip. This is where these diesel-electric locomotives are going along, and suddenly they hit a spot on the rail which is either covered in ice or oil, and there's no friction there, so the wheels just tend to spin away out of control. So we were working with a company to see if we could solve this problem, and I ended up being on a locomotive with the testing going all the way out to BC and back again. So, and I was in the front cabin there. And what we were doing, see these diesel electric trains, they have a sort of a 16-cylinder diesel electric motor which turns an alternator to generate AC current. And then the AC current is converted into DC current and fed to the electric motors on the 3 sets of axles.
And that was your first job?
Yeah, coming to Montreal.
Wow.
My first job in Toronto was with a company called Barringer Research. And typically what they did, they were to help the mining companies know where it would be a good idea to dig down and find iron or other things. And they handled problems that industry came to them with, and I was assigned to, this sounds weird, but nearby, I think it's in Sudbury, they would melt down iron to make steel. And to make steel, you have to add just a small amount of carbon. And the problem was to determine, when you're melting all this stuff down, what is the carbon content. And in those days you had to go and take a sample and cool it down and then send it off to the lab for analysis, by which time things could have changed. So we were looking at the possibility, that when something gets red hot or molten, it's emitting its characteristic spectrum. And the idea was to maybe set something up to look at the molten metal and from the strength of the spectrum lines determine immediately what the percentage of carbon was in there. But I never saw that to the bitter end because I jumped ship and ended up on riding locomotives across Canada.
So you went across Canada on that job?
Yeah.
So you went out west?
We worked with this company who had installed this equipment to detect how much current each of the wheels was taking. And it was comparing all of them together. And the minute you get what they call wheel spin, the current will shoot up.
Yeah.
So you looking at the differential. And the minute you see a differential, you know the wheel's spinning. So it sends a signal to back off the voltage to the
Let me
wheels.
pull you out of the science view for a minute. You fell in love with Montreal, left Toronto. Then you got to ride trains across Canada. What was your first impression of the Rocky Mountains when you saw them?
Oh, well, I mean, just mind-boggling to see these snow-capped mountains. And then to think that you ended up there as well.
There's a breadcrumb there, because that's where Simon and I ended up working in our young years. We went out west and we were equally impressed with the way the mountains came out of the prairies. You know, they just come up.
Staggering elevations and all snow-capped and so on.
Were you sleeping on the trains then? You must have.
I'm trying to...
Because those are big journeys.
Oh, the most remarkable thing was it's called the Yoho spirals. And to get the train from a higher elevation down to a lower elevation to come into Vancouver, they'd actually drilled a spiral tunnel. And the trains then were so long that as you entered, the front of the train where we were wound its way down the spiral. At the bottom, we could look up and see the end of the train coming down.
Oh, wow.
Lot along.
So I guess you could never have imagined when you were doing your cat studies that you'd be doing that. And then at what point did Mum join you? She joined you after...
Only after about 6 months, I think, because she came in the late December or early beginning of the next year.
Just in time for winter.
Yes, yeah. And that's where we sort of met all other immigrants, and we discovered cross-country skiing up in the Laurentians, canoe camping. All this was just incredible. And we were all sort of young and happy-go-lucky and no kids at the time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But how did that lead to I guess the next step would have been the first place. I know you were living in the city, but you then got the cottage, didn't you, at some point?
Yeah, how that came about is that typically when winter came, a group of us would rent a cottage in the Laurentians. And there'd be a big race to get up there Friday night, because then you could have first pickings of which bedroom. We would share the cooking and all that. And then after a few years, we said, why the hell, every year we go through this, we have to try and find a cottage and all that. Why don't we just buy a cottage, the 10 of us, because we were 5 couples. Mm. And so we set to work a lady who was a real estate agent up there. And she found us this cottage, and we said, yeah, great. So the 10 of us went to see about financing it, and the person said, this really isn't a good idea, because today you're all buddies, but a year from now, if one couple wants to get out, it's going to be so complicated to decide how much you give them or divide it and so. He said it would be much better if just one of you couples purchased the property, and then you can rent it out to the others and they can come and go or leave, and there'd be no
That's true banker speak, isn't it? They want security.
Yeah.
Okay.
So it ended up that Mum and I purchased the property, and then we would charge them. And if a couple weren't coming up that weekend, we were at liberty to have another couple who would come and pay us, and all that money would go towards the hydro bill at the end of the season.
Wow.
The other rule was there was one guy who was in charge of the beer. So he would buy all the beer in, and when you helped yourself to a beer in the fridge, you had to put your bottle cap in your cup, which had your name. And then at the end of the month, he would count the bottle caps and bill you.
Wow.
So, and then the other little rule was that you'd have it in terms to cook the Saturday meal. So instead of 5 couples all preparing their own meal on the main, it's on Saturdays, we'd all been off skiing and we're all hungry. So one couple would be responsible to cater to the Saturday evening meal. That was one of the rules.
Okay, so you came to Canada. You left Toronto for Montreal. Mum joined you.
Got married in a year later. Went back to Denmark to be formally married.
and then you came back to Canada. And then you saw Volkswagen Westphalia. It's just a caravan.
No, because we did everything ourselves. Mum made the curtains. I made the folding bed and the storage area and a sink unit. It was an empty van.
But it was a van that you converted into a camper van.
Yeah, oh yeah.
But you did it all yourself.
That's right, yeah.
But it looked like a Westphalia. It had the big VW on the front.
Yeah, but it didn't have that pop-up roof,
is that
which
the
is one
difference?
of the characteristics. And some of the early versions just had a double door opening, whereas we had the latest, which was a sliding
That was
door.
Advanced technology.
Yeah.
So how did you go from Toronto to Montreal, marrying Mum, coming back to Montreal, and then was it 2 years you went on a journey?
Yeah, 16 months was the total time.
Tell me the story.
19 countries.
Okay, so tell the story. How did it start? How did it end?
Following Expo, or before Expo, some couple had driven literally round the world. They did the States, Central America, South America, and then they went across to South Africa and worked their way all the way up and even went on and on and on. And it inspired us to do something similar, but maybe not quite as ambitious round the world. We would just settle for South America. So we had to fix up the vehicle, and Mum is very good at upholstery and needlework, so she did all the curtains and the covers and so on. And I did the sink unit where we could have fresh water, pump it up, and a propane gas tank for independent cooking, a little burner and so on. So to get rid of all the stuff in our apartment, we invited all our friends round and said, "What do you want?" So they said, "Oh, you take $5 for this lamp?" "Yeah, okay, what about that table and chairs?"
So it was a fundraiser.
Yeah, so we cleared all our stuff because we didn't want any...
But at this point, had you quit work? Had you just decided you were going to go on a sabbatical?
Yeah.
Wow.
And so we set off and we went right across Canada to Vancouver and then to Vancouver Island. And on the way there was various friends, either of Mum's from Denmark who'd moved out here. Then we headed down through the States when we took in the Grand Canyon. We found a place to leave the vehicle, and then we hiked down, and we started off in snow, and then later we hit cactus, and then eventually you get to the bottom and there's a river at the bottom, and there's a place called the Phantom Ranch where you can stay overnight, which is what we did before walking all the way back up out of the Grand Canyon. We went to Las Vegas. We got a photograph of us in front of $1 million, which is now on the refrigerator.
Yeah.
We tried to take in famous places and museums and sites on the way down. Then we hit Mexico, and then to what used to be called British Honduras. It's called Belize now.
Yeah, I've been there.
And we saw some of the
the Belizean
Aztecs and Mayan centers, which had been excavated from the forest, which had taken over all their ceremonial sites and so on. And then on and on and on down to Panama. And a lot of people might imagine, well, can't you drive from North America to South America? But you run into what they call the Darien Gap, which is a terrible forest, tropical forest full of deadly insects, and never alone that, there's revolutionaries and all sorts of nasty people inhabiting there. So it's just impossible to drive from Panama to Colombia. So what you have to do is, with other groups we met doing the same thing, go round to all the shipping companies and ask if they'll take your vehicle round to a place called Buenaventura. And eventually we did find a company and they've loaded the vehicle on, but they don't take passengers, so you have to independently either fly or go by bus down to Buenaventura, which we did. And we stayed at a very cheap hotel for about $1 a night. And we used to go to the shipping office each day to say, here's our ship with our vehicle come in. And they say, well, mañana.
Mañana, siempre mañana.
And then eventually they said, well, we've got good news and we've got bad news. The good news is the ship is here, but the bad news is the port is full and it's unable to get in. So a few more days went by and eventually we were warned, go down to the dock and speak to the people who are unloading because your stuff could be pilfered or stolen. So we managed to find which ship it was. We waved to the guys. It was a bunch of Americans. They said, oh, come on board. So they had nice air conditioning. Hey, you want a beer or something? Yeah. Show us your papers and we'll make sure, your vehicle will be loaded and you'll be there. And in those days, it was advisable to get a document which proved that you bought your vehicle into the country and you had it stamped to prove that you took the vehicle out. Because if you were to sell it in that country, you're not really allowed to do that because they'll be after you for taxes. So we diligently took this paperwork, and we actually had to put a deposit up at a bank in Montreal for the value of the vehicle. So if we did sell it down there, they can go and get taxes from this deposit.
Wow.
Anyway, we met with others and we got all through this labyrinth of paperwork for ourselves and for the vehicle. And so we met some Germans, and there's a Japanese couple and a Canadian couple, I think. And we said, hey, let's all stick together, because we'd heard some horror stories about kidnappings and robberies on the road. So we all drove off together for quite a few distance before we individually split up, because they're all going to different places. So typically we would get into a little village each night, and we'd all be in a row together, and we'd all be cooking our suppers. And then all the kids from the village would come out and say, who the hell are these people? Where have they come from? All very curious, but very kindly. It wasn't unusual when we were back by ourselves. When it was getting, towards night time, we would find somebody farmer's place, and we'd explain in our crude Spanish that we were traveling, and would it be okay if we could stay next to them? We showed them that we weren't, harmful. And many of them were very happy to say, yeah, and they'd give us some drink or some food or something. Generally, we would cook for ourselves. Food was very cheap. You could go to the markets and pay nothing for potatoes, tomatoes, and so on. And then to get safe water, if we saw, sometimes you get these Coca-Cola factories, and they only wanted pure safe water to make their product. So you could go in and say, can I fill up with some...
But they let you do it for free? Or...
Yeah, for free, as far as I can recall.
Wow.
And then in Brazil, there was huge orchards of where they grew oranges. The oranges would sometimes tumble off these trucks who'd go to the orchards to fill up, and we would stop along the roadside and just pick up these free oranges.
Good way to eat.
So we didn't really spend much on food. And when we got down to Chile, we were given the name of a dress of some friends of friends, and they said, just go and knock on their door and tell them that you're friends of so-and-so and so-and-so. So we did this. We knocked on the door, and we tried to explain, hey, we're friends of so-and-so. They said we could come and see you. And they said, well, can't really recall, but don't worry, come on in. And then before we knew it, they were doing dances with handkerchiefs, the Chilean
is it flamenco? Not flamenco, that's Spanish.
No, that's Spanish.
The Chilean.
And they said, why don't you stay? And we ended up staying with these people, and they took us to, there's a big gambling city, and they showed us all around, and in the end we had to say, thanks very much, we really got to get going now. So
and you didn't gamble
away?
They
were so friendly, the Chilenos.
Wow.
So then we made it all the way to the famous beach in Ipanema. You remember the song, The Girl from Ipanema?
I don't know if I know that song.
Famous Brazilian song there. There was one scary time we were coming through Peru, and the roads are so dangerous there that you're only allowed to go in one direction on Mondays, Wednesdays, Fridays, and the other direction on the Tuesdays, Thursdays and Saturdays, and I think Sundays you were allowed to go both ways, but they had precipitous drop-offs, horrendously, and often you'd see lots of crosses where a bus had gone over or something like that.
Oh my goodness.
I know we'd gone a big distance, and then I looked at the front of our vehicle where the spare tyre was normally bolted on, and it was gone. But where the hell? Maybe with all the bincing and bouncing, it had fallen off, and we'd unknowingly driven over it.
Oh my gosh.
So we had to go and find a garage and get that done. But Volkswagen was very well represented down there, and you could often find a garage or a repair centre. In fact, when in Brazil, we went to the VW factory, and they said, wow, you've driven all that way in one of our vehicles? Hey, come, we'll give you a tour of the factory, and then we'd like to treat you to lunch afterwards. And they were very impressed with our vehicle because it had the sliding door.
That was the modification you made, wasn't it?
Oh, no. I mean, you bought it with a sliding door.
Oh, you bought it, okay.
To say, at the VW factory in Brazil, they were manufacturing the previous version, which had the sort of double door opening, which is not as nice as the sliding door one.
So they were fascinated by your model then?
Yeah. I think they were thinking the Germans and not get them up to date or something.
And somehow you made your way back up.
Yeah, we went through Paraguay and then back up through Peru and Ecuador, Colombia, Central America, Texas, and then finally home.
But then I guess the next major thing that obviously I wasn't alive then, but then I must have been, 3 years old, and Simon was just born, and you took us to South Korea for a few years.
Yes.
How did that come about?
Well, I was working for a company which was involved with the fabrication of nuclear power plants. It was tokenly called Atomic Energy of Canada. And there was a subsidiary company a private company called Canatom, who was engaged to actually construct these nuclear power plants. But Atomic Energy of Canada will look after the actual atomic reactor, because that's sort of a very specialized part of it. But basically, whether you're using coal or oil, what you want to end up with is steam to feed to the turbines to generate the electric power. So there was what they call the reactor building, where all the uranium rods were put in horizontally. So the Canadian design was famous, the CANDU reactor, because of its horizontal design, and you could, when the core in the middle could be taken out and put on the outside, and the outside ones could be put in the middle to try and extract the maximum.
A revolver chamber kind of thing.
It didn't revolve; it was static.
Okay.
But these nuclear rods would go in, and there was a whole mechanism to shunt them around. But no, I was working for a company that said, "Hey, do you want to go on overseas assignment?" So I said, okay, sounds attractive, because then you don't have to pay any taxes. And miraculously, we rented the cottage out for about 2 years while we were the other side of the world to a very reliable couple, James Jackson and his wife. So Simon was about to arrive, and we didn't know, should we go out to Korea and he be born there, or should we play safe and have him born here, and then, which is the option we took. I think it was in a January. And then we had the massive problem of sorting out all our stuff in the downtown apartment we had, inasmuch Can Atom said, we allow you to take so much stuff to Korea, so sort that aside and we'll take care of it and ship it out to Korea to you, your kids' clothes and what have you. And then we will put in storage for you a load of stuff that you can't bring to Korea, and you're leaving your apartment, so we'll look after that. So that's lot number 2. And lot number 3 is what we're going to take in our suitcases for the flight from Montreal all the way to Seoul. And in Seoul, they pick you up and take you down to Woolsong, which was a remote little fishing village, which had been selected to build the nuclear power station, because it had to be, in this case, close to the sea, because to cool down the condensers, took in the seawater and put it out.
So we ended up there, but it was a whole community.
Yeah, Simon was barely a few weeks old, and we joined this Canadian community, which was always in a state of flux, because from square one, you had the architect chaps, because they were building the basic structures, and when all the buildings were finished, they got phased out and those families got sent back. And then us, I was in what they call control and instrumentation, all the pipes and the valves and the controls, that all had to be installed, and all the electric cabling. When our time was up, then you had what they call the commissioning crews would come in, because they've got to start the whole thing up and check everything and train the Koreans, because we were actually selling it to the Korean government.
So it was set them up and then let them run it, more or less.
Yeah.
Transfer of knowledge kind of deal?
Exactly, yeah. Even I think we put 2 generating units, and there was plans when we left, the Koreans, with all the knowledge they then had, they were going to build another 2 units to sort of beef up the output. And apparently it was one of the most reliable power generating sites on the record.
Oh, wow.
Because many of them, break down, or there's a leak or something, but ours had a good reputation.
You told me a funny story about when they got the galvanizing dip wrong, and then something screwed up, and they had to spend what they called 100 days working, where the Koreans had to come in and fast track so you stayed on schedule. Do you remember that story?
Yes, that was called Begil, 100 days. Because the Korean contractors were sort of plunged into something completely new, the schedule wasn't met with the installation of the various components of the whole site. So they came down heavily on the Koreans and said, I think it was Dong-A and Hyundai were the 2 major civil contractors who'd have been engaged to build the place. And because they're all new to it and have to work in English and so on. And we used to have daily meetings with them and say, hey, why haven't you finished this, or what's the problem there? And so to catch up the schedule, they were instructed, you have to work 100 days non-stop, no Saturdays, Sundays, holidays or anything. Really, the Orientals are quite a disciplined lot, and they focused, and indeed they did manage, I believe, to catch up with the schedule. But as I say, the Koreans, like many of the Orientals, are very well disciplined, and they'll go along with what you tell them.
And they managed to catch up.
Yeah, because in the Korean culture, the boss is the boss, and you do what he tells you to do. You never. But with us, the boss, we could say, "Oh, you don't know what you're talking about." There was a much freer
A flat hierarchy, maybe.
Yeah. The Western is a little bit more casual with the jibing and what you can say to your boss.
I must have been young, but I remember it was a suburb, wasn't it, we lived in, and it was a bunch of houses it was a Canadian community.
Yeah.
Embedded, and I remember there was hills around us with Buddhist temples.
Yes.
And we used to also have big kimchi pots outside of the house. And
that's the traditional way of preserving cabbage, because, way back in earlier times, there wasn't such a thing as refrigeration.
Yeah.
And we were actually next door to a Korean couple, although he spoke English and he lived in Canada. And they would typically have these big earthenware pots, and they put cabbage and garlic layered with maybe vinegar or something. And then each day you dip in, and that would be a staple food, actually, for many typically in Korean.
Do I also have a memory of a helicopter with the Prime Minister coming in to visit us?
Trudeau visited us.
Yeah, Pierre Trudeau. Yeah. I have a memory of a helicopter landing. We were all lined up waving.
Yeah, with flags.
And Pierre got off the...
Pierre Trudeau came, you're right. Yeah, and they had to paint houses and things where his car was going to pass to sort of smarten up the place.
Oh, right. Wow.
Oh, I'm not sure if Mum or myself or you or something actually went up and
we shook hands with him.
Shook his hands, yeah.
I have a memory that I didn't shake his hand for some reason, but you did, and I don't know why. It was quite a vivid memory to have that helicopter come in and the Canadian Prime Minister walk between us.
Yeah, that's right. I'd forgotten that.
But then once we wound down, we did a trip around the world, didn't we? You broke the plane ticket up.
That's right. There was these Chinese travel agents. Well, Ken Atom said, okay, your time is up. Here's your ticket from Seoul back to Toronto or Montreal. But you could take this ticket, and one of these Chinese travel companies could break it up. And I think we ended up going to the Philippines. We went to Thailand. And then we came to England to see all the...
we went to India too.
Oh, we went to India.
I remember India.
Taj Mahal.
Yeah, I remember seeing the Taj Mahal.
We had you looked after in the hotel while Mum and I went to see the Taj Mahal. This Indian lady would sit by your bed and just comfort you.
So I remember that, and then we went back to England, you said, as well.
Yeah, it was the last concluding chance to sort of see all the sisters and so on. And then the final one back to Montreal. And then we had nowhere to live, so we actually moved into the cottage for the first year.
Did you kick the others out?
Didn't really kick them. I think they knew, the time was up and we were returning.
I'm sure it was more than a year, because I went to elementary school.
Oh, yeah. You did come of age and you had to start school.
Yeah.
And the problem was you were destined to go to French school unless I could prove I was educated in English. And I couldn't get any papers from England to that effect. But buried away in the law says you can go to a member of the church and swear on the Bible that you had been educated in English, and that would count. And if you remember, in Moran Heights, there was the Reverend Canon Bowl, B-A-U-G-H, but it sounds like the Reverend Canon Ball. And we went to his facility at the church, and I swore on the Bible that I was educated in English. And he fortuitously worked for the school board, and he was keen to get as many bodies into the school as possible in Moran Heights. And then once you've got one of your children in, it follows the others can also follow suit and attend English school.
So that's how I ended up in that school. But I felt like I was there longer before we moved to Montreal. But maybe my memory... Because I was in there grade 1 and 2, wasn't I?
Maybe about a year or so, was it?
But then we moved to Montreal.
Yeah. When I think of it, I don't know how we managed to come down and look at houses and sign on and with you two.
Well, there was one house you were showing me when I was young. And you said the criteria is you wanted to live near another family we'd lived with called the Greekians. And you'd said we wanted to get a house near them, and they're just down the road from
That's right, just a few blocks away.
We're sitting in the house you bought recording.
Yeah.
And I remember you took us round and said, we want to get a house near them. And then you got this place, didn't you?
Yeah. Well, the connection with the Greekians was when Simon was coming close to being born, we had asked Kanatum, if he's born in Korea, what are the facilities like? So they said, well, we're going to put you in touch with Sally Greekian, and she's just had a daughter, and she was born at the American hospital, and the facilities were very good, and there was no problems. Speak to Sally about that. I think we vaguely contacted her. And then we thought it over, and we thought, no, let's play safe and just go to the hospital, which is just down the road. So that was how we were connected with them, because she just...
But they were in Korea with us as well.
Yeah.
So interestingly, we all came back, and then they went on to another...
Oh my goodness, they went to Romania, they went to China, they went to Argentina.
But you stopped. You stayed.
Yeah.
Were we too much of a hassle at that point?
Well, fortuitously, I got the job with SR Telecom, and I was commuting from the cottage to SRT for quite a while until we came here.
Yeah. And then we settled here and stayed and grew some roots.
Yes.
So we got to keep the cottage, keep the city house.
I remember in the old days when we would drive up to the cottage for the weekend for activities, and then on the way down, you and Simon, maybe it was the pair of you, used to doze off on the way home down the Laurentian autoroute. And then, of course, we'd get home and you'd all be all charged up again, and poor old mum and dad are worn out.
Well, it was good activity. We got lots of fresh air. We were always out. We were certainly a great childhood that we got. And would it be the case that the money you made in Korea, more or less, was good enough to allow us to have that life, wasn't it? Because you didn't have to pay taxes and...
Yes, that's true. It was a close call in a way, because when we left for Korea, you filled out some forms to the federal government to saying we're no longer residents in Canada, and they would give you approval that you don't have to pay any taxes. But we never got anything from the Quebec government. And then when we came back, the Quebec government was looking into the fact that a lot of Bell employees had gone to Saudi Arabia and made lots of money, but they hadn't paid any taxes. So they begin to make some rules that if to declare yourself, not to pay taxes, you mustn't have a bank account, a driving license, or property in Quebec. And there was a big argument and so on, and thank goodness, by the time they implemented that law, it wasn't backward.
It wasn't retroactive.
It wasn't retroactive, and all the funds we'd put away in the Channel Islands were okay.
Wow. But then you worked at SRT. I remember you taking lots of business trips there.
Yes. I went to so many countries to promote this microwave telecommunications equipment. I went to about 16 countries, I think. I went even to Saudi Arabia, Iran, Russia, South Africa, Egypt, Brazil, China. Yeah. I'm glad I'm not traveling now.
That's my problem now, isn't it?
Yeah, over to you.
I'm the one who's got to jump on planes now and try and chase some money. But what a life, eh? As you reflect back, no wonder you wanted to stay still for a while. Must have been exhausting. But very interesting stories. Of your trips on SRT, do you have one in particular you remember? You were telling me something about a Saudi story once that you had.
Was it there I purchased? Oh no, that was in Iran, it was Saudi Arabia. I bought back all the
dish dash,
the Saudi stuff, and you used it later at a fancy dress party, didn't you?
Halloween. I got dressed in it for Halloween, I think.
Yeah.
Oh no, Simon did, because I got dressed as a Viking. Simon dressed in all your dish dash that you brought back from Saudi Arabia.
Well, we laughingly say that the men are wearing a tea towel with a fan belt.
Oh, that might be controversial now. But it was a different era then, wasn't it? You could certainly has changed a lot. But Well, thanks for the walk down memory lane. That was quite the experience. We recorded quite a lot today.
Oh my goodness, you're going to have to clean it up a bit.
That's okay. You must be exhausted having relived all that. But well done.
Yes. It's well, I have all these maps which can be looked at, which delineates exactly where we travelled, and even little writings summing up what happened of significance at
and your
that
budget
point in our travel.
And your budget. You said you wrote down your budget, how much you spent every day.
I think it was only about $4,000 or $5,000.
Wow. Total for 16 months?
Yeah, remember, no airfares, no hotels.
Free oranges on the road?
Yes.
Free Coca-Cola water?
Yeah.
Well, what I do remember is at the cottage when we were young, you used to put a bed sheet up on the door, not on the door, but in between two rooms, and you'd project the slideshow of that whole trip.
Yeah.
You did carousel, and then you would tour and go to libraries and give talks on it, didn't you?
Well, to friends, I think, yeah. Maybe all the chaps in the Viking ski club said, "Hey, tell us about your travels."
Yeah, it's a shame those slides didn't last, but I remember the slideshows we did, or you did anyway, for the family, and very warm memories. But anyway, thanks for retelling the stories, Dad.
Sorry, I'm a bit vague on the detail.
Well, it's a lot to cover.
Oh, jeez.
Thank you for listening. To support Spark Hub, please have a look at the show notes below this episode, or visit thesparkhub.com to sign up for our newsletter, which offers exclusive inside scoops. Just quickly, the music you're hearing is composed by Shi Hao Yan, and the audio engineering is done by Emily Chung. My name is Alan, and I hope that you dream big and something sparked in you today.